Alright, here to do my review of UFC 150 or 135. Uh, got a little ahead of myself. Anyways, fight card was undercard I really liked. Main card, we'll get to that though. James DeHuna knocked out Ricardo Romero. Kind of impressive because Romero does have pretty good chin. We've seen that because he takes repetitive punishment from Petrozelli and then from Kingsbury. Kingsbury did finish him, but after a lot of punishment. And so Tehuna's got, I think, a bit more power than I generally considered him having. Mizugaki versus Escobedo. This was by far the best Takeya Mizugaki we've seen probably ever. He was against a pretty good fighter in Cole Escobedo. Maybe not the greatest stand-up in the world, but a good grappler, good kicker. And Mizugaki came out there, was very aggressive, worked very good boxing. Got a little bit beaten up in the clinch a little bit with Escobedo, and I was quite, I was concerned with that because, he really needs to not get in that clinch situation with a guy who's pretty good in clinch. But, yeah, and Mizugaki showed just more power than we're generally used to seeing. I mean, this is a guy who historically has won a lot of decisions. This is just his fifth TKO or KO. I'm not sure what the other four exactly were, but they're against substantially lower competition. And so this was a pretty impressive run for Mizugaki and a big step up for him, not necessarily in competition or even in quality of win, but in domination of win, in the form of he went out there and looked just impressive. Junior Asuncao, Eddie Yagin, not a very good fight. Asuncao clowning around, Yagin not really engaging. Asuncao takes the UD. There's really not a lot to say about this. Yagin's only moments where he had a pair of guillotine chokes that he wasn't really all that close to. And Asuncao controlled the stand-up despite not really throwing a lot of strikes, but Yagin was seemingly quite happy to just keep sitting back. Eddie Yagin had a lot of hype going on. I didn't believe it at the time, and I still don't. Anyways, Tim Boetsch, Nick Ring, good fight, competitive for the large part. Tim Boetsch is kind of showing you that he brings a lot to middleweight. I think there's a lot of things he can do at middleweight. Not a title contender like he's trying to make himself out to be, and he should. I mean, fighters' job is to win and to promote themselves, and you don't want to promote yourself as, I'm never going to win a title, I'm never going to challenge for a title. So I appreciate that he's, promoting himself. He doesn't really have the skills to, but he has very good wrestling. He has heavy hands. He's very, very strong. He's a pretty good grappler. His stand-up is not bad. In general, this is a guy to look at 185. Tony Ferguson versus Aaron Riley. Aaron Riley with, I believe, the third time he's had his jaw broken in the UFC, which is not good. Ferguson looked really good. A lot of people expected him to because, of course, the UFC tends to set up tough winners with a match they can definitely win. This was no exception, but I think this is probably the worst beating I've seen Aaron Riley take, and that is saying something. So we might have something in Tony Ferguson here. He was able to land strikes largely at will, obviously with a lot of power to break the jaw, and we'll see what he does next. I'll give you who should Boetsch and Ferguson fight next. Boetsch, I'm kind of interested in seeing him take a considerable step up in competition. He's beaten Kendall Grove and Nick Ring. Perhaps it's time to move up to something a little higher on the food chain. Maybe. I mean, I keep thinking of guys, and I'm like, no, that's too much of a step up a lot of the time. Maybe, though, someone along the lines of Aaron Simpson, Ed Herman, or a Tom Lawler would be interesting. And for Tony Ferguson, something winnable. He's still very early on in his career. Something akin to a Joe Lozon, something akin to a Matt Wyman, something along those lines. Moving on to the main card, Nate Diaz beating up Takanori Gomi. Good display of boxing by Diaz, and of course the submission with the armbar. That being said, this is the Gomi, unfortunately, that we have now, and that is not the Gomi that was dominant in Pride. And, you know, people are instantly going to say he was overhyped and overrated. The problem with that is that Gomi became, I'm going to use the word unmotivated, because that seems to be what it is, because he's not that old. He's not that injured. He should still be bringing it. But, like, I think it started around the, excuse me, jeez, sorry, should not be yawning like that. It started around the initial Nate Diaz fight, and to a less, or Nick Diaz fight, and to a lesser extent when he got tapped by Marcus Aurelio. Since then, he has not looked good in any fight. I mean, he's won fights, don't get me wrong, but they were all in less than spectacular Gomi fashion, with the exception of the Tyson Griffin fight, but that was, you know, 1 minute and 4 seconds of his career. He lost to Sung Hyun Bang. He got the win, but he lost. And then the irony is that he beat Sergey Golayev and got the loss. So I guess that kind of, you know, equals out. Got submitted by Kyoka, beat Nakahura, or Nakakura, pardon me. And then beat Tony Hervey, who's a journeyman of the lower orgs. Lost to Ken Flo in the UFC, beat Tyson Griffin, lost to Guida, lost to Diaz. Fortunately, I think it's time for him to basically figure out what's wrong, because he's young enough and healthy enough to make this comeback. As for what Diaz should do, he should probably stay at 155 for a little bit, but I'm unsure who I want to see him to fight, because I still think a wrestler completely obliterates him, and it's a wrestler-heavy division. Maybe put him in there with Dennis Seaver. That could be interesting. Then we had Travis Brown versus Rob Broughton. Rob Broughton did not look very good, but Travis Brown did for 2 rounds, and then was clearly very gassed. Rob Broughton needs to work on one thing, and it's not so much takedown defense, although that needs work. It's more, when he gets taken down, he doesn't seem to gain guard at all. Kind of like Carmelo Marrero, if you remember the Carmelo Marrero-Ryan Bader fight, where it was not that Bader was taking Marrero down, it was that he was taking him down effortlessly into side control. That was the problem. Marrero seemed to have no clue how to establish a guard. And Rob Broughton was kind of in the same boat in this particular fight. No shame in it. Travis Brown, I think, is one of the rising stars in the UFC heavyweight division, and there's a couple guys over at Strikeforce who are also kind of on the rise. Shane Del Rosario, Daniel Cormier. Cormier's not so young, but young in the sport. Good win for Brown. Moving on. He's beaten Struve. He's now beaten Struve, and he's beaten Broughton. Next up for him. He's one of these guys I'd like to see tested. I've been calling for him versus Matt Mitrione for some time. So let's go with that, because Mitrione's fighting Congo. And after that fight, we could definitely see Mitrione versus Brown. And I would love to see that fight. Mark Hunt, Ben Rothwell, ugliest fight of the night, bar none. Hunt had cardio for 2 rounds. Rothwell had cardio for 1 round. That was it. The 3rd round was terrible. With Ben Rothwell, the question is, what happened to his cardio? Because there was a time when he had cardio, and you got out cardio by Mark Hunt, who has always had pretty crappy cardio. What's next for Hunt? Someone who's not going to take him down is basically the answer to this question. As to who that is, I don't know. Him versus Congo could be interesting, but Congo might just take him down and out cardio him. Maybe Pat Barry. There we go. Let's throw that out there. Mark Hunt, Pat Barry. See if that can happen. And then Josh Koscheck, Matt Hughes. Kind of Matt Hughes came out, looked pretty good. He was mixing some things up with the boxing, a little bit of low kicks. But it was only a matter of time, I thought, where Koscheck's superior speed, superior power would come into play, and superior explosiveness, and it did. He clipped Hughes a number of times, and eventually, you know, we saw Matt Hughes almost try to pull guard, and that's never a good sign. And he gets pounded out. What does it mean for Koscheck? Very little, to be honest. This was a fight that, for the longest time, has been an obvious Koscheck win. Where does he go from here? I don't know. The problem with Koscheck is he's lost twice to GSP. And you don't really want to put him in there against someone who's going to a title shot, because if he beats them, you wind up with like talk of Josh Koscheck's top contender for a third shot at GSP, and that is terrible. So I'm left thinking, you know, what would be a good fight? And it's hard to say because he can wrestle a lot of people down, but he seems to have fallen in love with the stand-up. So I'm going to throw out Martin Kampmann versus Josh Koscheck. That could be a little bit interesting. For Matt Hughes, there's only one fight Matt Hughes should have. Settle the score with Dennis Hallman and retire. And that's it. Then in the main event, John Jones beating Rampage Jackson Runig, choking the 4th round. John Jones showing very good use of his length, very good use of his God-given athleticism. Joe Rogan was kept trying to say how much he's improved. I don't think he has. I mean, he has. He's not one of these lazy fighters who relies on physical skills, and I'll give him that. He's adding more techniques to his repertoire. It is looking cleaner. That being said, it looks so good because of his 84-inch reach, his speed, his explosiveness, his general athleticism. And Joe Rogan needs to open his eyes to that, I think, because this is another case of just some terrible, terrible commentary. Although I did agree with him when they stood up Mark Hunt from Side Control. What the F is that? A ref should, unless you are literally doing nothing, a ref should never stand someone up from a dominant position like side control or mount. That was about as bad. That was not as bad as the Roy Nelson-Andre Arlovsky fight, which, if you remember, Roy Nelson got stood up while having a Kimura locked onto Arlovsky. But it was pretty bad. Anyways, back to the main event. John Jones just kind of beating Rampage. Not beating Rampage up, but at no point did you think, you know, Rampage is going to win this fight. At no point during that fight would you really have thought that, other than, you know what, if he clips him on the chin. Excuse me. If Rampage clips him on the chin, he might go down. That was the whole time the only thing that anyone had to hope for, unfortunately. And who's next for Jones? Obviously Rashad Evans. Who's next for Rampage? Wouldn't mind a rematch with Lyoto Machida. Let that settle the score. And if Machida can beat him, then he's in title contention. Not that that's a great thing, because I do not know who can beat John Jones right now. And it's just that reach and that explosiveness, that athleticism, that just makes it incredibly difficult. Anyways, that was my thoughts on UFC 153. 135. I'm having dyslexia this morning. Leave comments, your thoughts in there. Any fights that I kind of, you know, missed, is that would be, you know, this makes a lot of sense for this fighter. Go ahead. Peace out.